Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Asiri, and each week I meet with military veterans to learn about what they do in their civilian career and how they got there. Today's episode number 147 with Bill Angeloni.
And I think the amount of luck that it takes to have the experience that I have, I didn't appreciate it at the time, right? I mean, I just thought this is what happened. I mean, that was my first startup, and I got really lucky. But as time goes on, and as I work with others, you realize that not too many do that. And obviously, the venture capital world has figured out that like 90% of companies fail, and it's just something that I think you need to go into eyes wide open.
Well, my guest today, Bill, has quite an eclectic background. He has done everything from working at United Airlines to working at a consulting company to starting his own consulting company to joining high-growth startups to advising them and starting companies. He has done a lot of different things. And one of the reasons I think you would really enjoy this is he has a great perspective on networking. If you've listened to other Beyond the Uniform interviews, you realize how many of my guests found an opportunity through networking and how often veterans are off-put by networking. Bill does an exceptional job of talking about how a veteran can approach networking in a way that feels right for them. He also has a great perspective on how to find a job and join a high-growth startup, just like he did. And he talks about what it's like starting your own consulting company and other companies as well. I think you'll find it just an interesting perspective, too, at how you can have a lot of variety in your career. There's no one answer, there's no one path, and you don't need to get it right on your first time. As always, at beyondtheuniform.io, you'll find other interviews just like this, show notes with references to everything we discussed, and a text transcript as well. And if you are liking the show, it would be great to receive a 5-star review on iTunes. It really helps get the word out about the show. So with that, let's dive in to my interview with Bill. Joining me today in Sonoma, California is Bill Angeloni. Bill, welcome to Beyond the Uniform.
Thanks, Justin. Great to be here.
So for listeners, I wanted to give you a very brief bio on Bill. He is the founder and director of Tenzing Consulting, which is a global management consulting firm he co-founded that now has over 850 experts and works with Fortune 1000 clients and private equity companies. He started out at the Naval Academy, after which he served as an officer in the Navy for 5 years, while also earning his MBA from Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management. After his time on active duty, he worked at United Airlines doing strategy and operation work, as well as a manager at AT Kearney and a global manager at FreeMarkets, Inc., which was a startup where he opened their European offices and helped grow to $200 million and then took public. After that, he co-founded his own management consulting firm, which he has co-led for 7 of the last 15 years. He took an 8-year leave of absence to lead a tech company turnaround and start a couple other companies. He has worked with over 30 startups over his career and thinks of himself as a startup junkie. So, Bill, maybe to start things off, there's always blind spots we have, and I'm just wondering, most of the audience that you're speaking to is active duty listeners. What's one thing that they don't know about their upcoming or eventual transition to a civilian career?
I think there's a lot of anxiety, obviously, in the transition to a civilian career, and certainly I had it. I think on a positive note, I think the best thing is that you don't realize how prepared you actually are. A lot of the skills that we develop in the military really help you in civilian career, and it's actually unique that you have these skills, things like a mission focus, the resilience to when something changes to adapt and keep going, flexibility and a willingness or the ability to just, change course as needed. And then leadership, I think we forget that whether we've actually led people or been a follower of great leaders, we have a good understanding of what good leadership looks like. We all have the leaders that we love to follow, and we have those that we don't really care for. And I think having that insight as well as you get into the civilian community gives you kind of a leg up on a lot of other people.
That's great. And what was your first job search like? What led you to United Airlines?
So it was actually a pretty terrible experience. I got out of the Navy in '92 during a recession, and at the time Kellogg wasn't allowing its part-time. I went part-time obviously because I was still in the Navy. They weren't allowing their part-time graduates to use their placement service, and so I basically leveraged my Naval Academy network and just started making phone calls and talking to people about what was out there, what my interests were, and that led me to a gentleman that was at United that knew that they were for the first time actually hiring MBAs, and I ended up talking to them and getting an offer to join them, and it was the only offer that I had at the time. So it was a pretty challenging experience, I'll say, and it was certainly disconcerting leaving the military with a great undergrad degree in aerospace engineering from the Naval Academy, and just graduating from the top. It was ranked number one in the country at Kellogg, and I couldn't even get interviews. It was crazy. Mm.
What was the work like while you were there? What does strategy and operations work look like in that capacity?
So my first role was actually route and fleet planning for United, and one of the first things I was tasked with doing was building a fleet plan which looked at what our growth was globally, market to market, and looking at the aircraft that we had. I think at the time it was about 600 aircraft, and looking at the capacity that each aircraft had and the utilization, and then figuring out how many we needed to bring in based on the routes that we were looking at adding going forward. So it was a pretty massive undertaking, and it was a lot of fun. We had a team of people that looked at all the routes, and we had one of us that was focused on the fleet, and so I would do a lot of analysis on different routes that we were looking at and the profitability of them, what we needed to price at in order to make some money, how many people we needed to capture in those markets as well. And then I ended up I moved to the international side and focused on what today is the Star Alliance. We did the first analysis of the first international partners to look at between Lufthansa and Air France, and ended up selecting Lufthansa, and that started what is now the Star Alliance. That was really, really interesting. And because of that analytical background, I actually got recruited. I used to do something every day after lunch. This is one of the things I think in corporate America that, at least for me, was kind of eye-opening. I never got to understand what else was going on across the company. I was kind of in my own little cube and working very, very long days. I was working 16, 18-hour days at United. And so every day after lunch, I would just walk to a different part of the campus and introduce myself and just ask people what they do. And one of those conversations, I struck up with a director that did all the planning for flight attendants for United. So from kind of large scale, how many do we need globally, to the details of how many are on each plane by cabin. And that ended up turning into a job offer for me to come over and kind of update their forecasting system. They were using some pretty crude, rudimentary, kind of really almost back of the envelope planning at the time. And so I worked with our ops research team to build some linear programming techniques, and we did some really cool planning and forecasting around that.
I'm thinking back to that first transition for you, and what you're describing is probably not that unusual for some veterans where they get out and that first job is difficult, and it sounds like it was unexpected for you because you're coming basically from grad school, and that's not going to make the connections for you that you want. What advice do you have for people about that first job search, especially for those who don't go on to grad school and they're kind of starting from scratch? Any advice for them on how to figure out what they want to do and figure out how to get that first job like you did at United?
I think a lot of it comes down to trying to be aware of what you like to do, and don't be worried if the first job isn't the right job for you. I mean, I certainly in my career I've changed quite a bit, and for me that part of that's due to growth. I like to learn. I like to find something new industries and everything else. I think that as you're attacking kind of the job search, doing it the same way, being open to things that maybe you haven't thought about before, and trying something new and different. Having an awareness of what you're good at and what you like to do certainly helps. And, I think that's easy to say. It's hard to do. There's all kinds of books and things out there to try to help you to do that. I would say that, I always knew I was analytical. I've always enjoyed that. So I was really kind of focused on doing that kind of a job search, very focused on, analytical roles. Ironically, I was not interested in consulting. I talked to a lot of people that had gone into consulting, and it just, at the time, it didn't seem like that would be a good fit for me. Obviously, that's changed quite a bit. But, at the time, that was really my focus, was just getting out and talking to people. And I think the other thing, too, is trying to just being a good listener and trying to find out what people do in their jobs. Just go out and talk to people about what they do. Because I was always surprised. I would go out and talk to these executives and just ask a bunch of questions about, so how did you get here, and what are the things that you did, and what do you like about it, what don't you like about it, I learned a lot in those conversations, and I think that, to the extent that people can do that and just go out and talk to people, you'll be surprised what you learn.
What was it that, it sounds like you didn't initially think you would want to do consulting, and then that ends up becoming a big part of your career. Was that something that changed in you, or was there a misunderstanding of what that would be like, or what was the discrepancy there?
What I figured out about myself was that I really liked having to learn new things all the time, and that's kind of echoed in. That's why I do a lot of stuff with these startups. It keeps me learning. It keeps me fresh on technology and on some different trends. And I didn't appreciate that about consulting. I think that my understanding of it initially was that hey, you're building a team. You're going to go in. You're going to help this company solve a problem, and you're going to follow a process. And to me, that kind of sounded a little too rote, a little too boring. And as I got more and more exposed to it, I realized that, the projects tend to be, depending on what kind of consulting you go into, but the projects tend to be, 3 to 6 months long. You're expected to get up to speed incredibly fast, and you just got to figure out, what's going on and what the challenge is and how you're going to correct it. And I think that as I got more and more exposed to just day-to-day things, I found out that I really liked that. And I had an opportunity that presented itself, and that was my transition into consulting.
And what would you want people to know about your time at AT Kearney? What was that experience like, and what did you learn there?
So I actually when I left United, I got recruited to join a smaller boutique consulting firm called the Canning Group, and it was a Booz Allen spinoff. And it was focused in aviation and aerospace, and specifically in strategy and market analysis. So I moved out to Park City, Utah for a few years, where this firm was based. And we worked for AT Kearney on a large strategy project. And so, I had been doing some work in the consulting world for about 2 years. And on this project, the leader of the project basically pulled me aside and just said, man, I really enjoyed working with you. If you ever would consider coming to AT Kearney, I'd love to have you. And I found out at one point that the company was going to be sold in Park City, and they were going to move to Phoenix. And that just wasn't going to be something that was interesting to me. And I had this open offer, and so I called AT Kearney back up and just said, "Hey, is the offer still open?" And they said, "Yeah, come on over. Let's get you in the interview process." So I still had to go through the interview process and everything else, but in the end, obviously they made me the offer, and I joined them.
And then you were there for a little while before. What kind of brought you to FreeMarkets?
So on my second project at AT Kearney, we were doing some work with the company United Technologies, and we were being introduced to the executive team the same day as this little startup called FreeMarkets. And it was a very interesting concept. The idea was basically FreeMarkets created the reverse auction. So you would put suppliers into an auction environment, and they would bid for, in this case, United Technologies business, and they would watch, the prices go down, right, which is hence the reverse auction. They were looking for somebody to work with, and they needed a first project. I was given about $100 million in commercial valves to go source, and so I went and traveled around the world finding suppliers that could do this. I had the market all set up and everything ready to go. Traditionally, you'd go into face-to-face negotiations, but we just didn't have enough time to get this done. We only had 5 months to get this project done, and I had traveled around the world twice already talking to suppliers. And so I called the CEO of FreeMarkets, who actually was an Army officer and had gone to GE and then had this idea and started this business. And so I called him up and just said, I've got this opportunity. I've got everything together. I'd love to use your process if you think it can work. And, in great military sense, he said, "I'll be there tomorrow." And we sat down and got it all set up. And the long story short is we ran this auction and saved the client over $30 million in about 3 hours.
Unbelievable.
So that was a pretty powerful moment for me to understand what the potential was. And at that point, he was saying, the CEO was saying, "Why don't you come join us? This is going to be great. We're growing like crazy." And at the time, they had 22 people, and I had just moved my family from Park City to Chicago with AT Kearney, and I just told him, "Man, it's just not the right time. I can't do that to my family right now." And he said, "All right, well, if something changes, let me know." And the UTC ended up not renewing the contract with AT Kearney, and they asked FreeMarkets to lead the way. And he said, "Well, we can do that, but we're going to need to build a team." And they said, "Great, start with Angeloni and McLeod."
Wow.
And so I got another phone call from the CEO, and this time it was a very attractive offer, and it was just too good to pass up. And so I joined with another gentleman from the AT Kearney team, who, ironically, was my co-founder at Tenzing as well.
How big were they when you joined them?
So I was employee 71. So they grew in the 6 months since I had been talking to them. They grew from 22 to 70. I joined in August, and by the end of the year, we were 105. They had about $1 million in revenue when I first joined. We finished that year with about $8 million, and then we grew that to $200 million in 3 years. We had about 1,200 people around the world. And I ran one of the lines of business. So the business was basically organized by sector, and so I ran aerospace, defense, and government for us. And what an amazing ride! Absolutely incredible to see an organization grow that fast, and then to go public and deal with the changes of becoming a public company. That's tough when you're used to being a private entity and all the fun that goes with the growth.
What was your life? I mean, it's helpful for listeners to kind of get a taste of what your life was like in this high growth startup environment. What was your life like? Were you traveling constantly? Like, what sort of activities were you doing? Just help them understand what a day in your life looked like in that period.
Yeah, so my role as I started there running the United Technologies account, or a piece of it. And then as I grew there, moving into the general manager role, then I had a lot of individuals working for me running accounts across our aerospace portfolio. The typical day, I mean, it's like any, I guess, executive type position where you're dealing with your customers and the things that are going on with them. You're dealing with your employees and the challenges that are going on there. You're kind of looking across the board at how to balance the needs of all these groups and the availability of resources. And these were long days. I mean, I know that people like to talk about work-life balance. I'm probably a terrible person to talk to about that. I think I really enjoy the work, and I think that for me the typical day was probably anywhere from 14 to 16 hours. But it was a lot of fun. I mean, it was, there was a lot of meetings, there's a lot of travel, and I think I averaged probably about 150,000 miles a year flying those years. I've done more, but that's a lot of flying, and so I would travel all over the world to meet with my customers or prospective customers, and talk to them about the services that we could offer, and how we might structure something like that, negotiate with them on pricing, and set up the agreements. So it's my role was kind of both a GM to run the business, but also sales support, and then like any leader, you're constantly balancing the needs of your team.
What is, just to put that in perspective, 150,000 miles in a year? Like, how often are you hopping on a plane at that point?
It's almost every week. To travel. I mean, I've done, when I was running the tech company in DC and commuting from Sonoma, I think my most miles I did that year was maybe 250,000. That was brutal. That was literally on a plane every week, and I don't advise that. But I think that I still travel a lot. I mean, this year I think I did about 130,000. I'm closing in on 2 million miles with United, and I think I've got another almost 1 million with other airlines. So I try not to think about how many hours I've spent in the air, but it's a long time. So yeah, but I think the needs of some of these companies, when you get to the point where you're running a global business, you can do a lot more today than we could, 10, 15 years ago, obviously, with Skype and video chat and whatever else you want to do. But there's just nothing like being, face to face with somebody and solving something that they've got that's bothering them or is challenging them. And I think that's, at least for the near term, that's likely to stay that way.
If someone is on active duty and it's their intention to get out and join a high growth startup, I mean, you really latched onto a rocket ship. What advice do you have for someone about how to find that high growth startup, and if that's possible to do that directly, or if there's something they need to do first, how can they go about that?
So I guess there's a couple thoughts there. One is to put yourself in a position so that you can meet a bunch of people that are working in this area, right? So there's pockets around the country of startup ecosystems, if you will, and so obviously Silicon Valley is well known, but I think lesser known is Boston and New York. Indiana has a big startup community going. Denver, there's quite a few others. So by positioning yourself in those areas and or being willing to locate there, I think that's number one. And then just start networking and talking to people that are working in some of these startups. There's all kinds of networking groups that you can track down and join. There's usually a tech innovation group in these cities that is kind of set up for networking. I know when I was running the firm in DC, we were part of a group there because it always helps to find employees that way. So I think one of the great things is that a company like that's growing that fast almost creates a vacuum. And so they're always looking for great people. And I think the skills that you have coming out of the military are so strong for something like that I think people have finally figured that out now. That, hey, you can take someone from the military, and even if they don't have the specific skill that you're looking for, you can teach them pretty quickly, and they'll be up to speed, and they'll be a phenomenal employee. And so I think that's really important. I think one comment I'll make, though, is that, I've worked with well over 30 now. There's only a handful that have been successful. And I think the amount of luck that it takes to have the experience that I have, I didn't appreciate it at the time, right? I mean, I just thought this is what happened. I mean, that was my first startup, and I got really lucky. But as time goes on, and as I work with others, you realize that not too many do that. And obviously, the venture capital world has figured out that like 90% of companies fail, and it's just something that I think you need to go into eyes wide open.
It's like almost having that expectation that like, hey, I'm going to join this startup, but there's, high likelihood that in 12 months or 24 months, I'm out of a job because the company doesn't exist anymore. And if you're still willing to do that, then to go for it. But just, is that kind of the expectation to go in with?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, obviously you hope that's not the case. I think that, looking at the market, looking at the team that's running the business, certainly helps to try to mitigate some of that. But in the last downturn here in 2008 and 2009, I mean, I had to shut down 2 companies that I started, and then like 2 or 3 other companies that I was an investor in. All got shut down in that period, like so many others around the country. And none of those were due to a failure of the business. It was basically, things that you couldn't control. The market just disappeared. People were trying to save their money, and they weren't buying the things that they were buying before. Financing wasn't available any longer. And so, stuff happens. So I think that, if you're going to go that route, keep your burn rate low, your personal burn rate as low as you can. Put as much money away as you can so you've got some flexibility, and then go for it. I mean, it's a lot of fun. I mean, I think that, it's not for everyone, for sure. But if you have that risk profile, I think it's a great time. It's a lot of fun, and you'll learn a heck of a lot.
If someone listening is on a ship or plane or stationed somewhere right now, and they're on active duty, they like what you're saying, they've got that risk appetite, they've got some savings built up, what can they be doing now to prepare for that? Is there any books or resources or things that might help them start to get ready for that career as part of a startup?
I think just doing some searches on the internet and looking for some of that. I don't have a specific book or blog or website that I'd recommend off the top of my head. I think the understanding the power of the network is really probably my biggest message to people on active duty. Work to build the network. Find a mentor that can help you kind of think through what you want to do and how you want to do it. And then if you have some ideas around locations that you might be interested in, I would just do some searches for different tech groups and networking groups in those locations, and that kind of preparation work will be invaluable as you look to transition.
And so you're on the heels of this explosive growth at FreeMarkets. The company goes public, which so few companies do. What happens between that and then what is the genesis of starting your own consulting company?
So we hit a downturn, like a lot of the businesses do. But in 2001, had the .com bubble burst. What's interesting about FreeMarkets was that we actually had a business. There was a lot of companies that went out and raised a bunch of money and against an idea, but didn't really have a business. We did a little bit different. We actually had a business, and we're making money, and we didn't go public until we actually were making money. But nonetheless, the downturn in 2001 came, and most of us that were on the service side of the business ended up seeing the writing on the wall. I mean, we needed to be a true tech business, and we were kind of a services business with a sexy tech back end, which was the auction itself. But we were in the process of transitioning a lot of that work into technology. And so during the downturn, everybody started to clamp down. A bunch of us left the company, and we were looking at what to do next. I was interviewing for like VP of strategy jobs and some different things, and then I got a call from a client at Alcoa, former client of mine, and they called and said, hey, we're getting ready to kick off this huge initiative. I know you've done a bunch of these before. Would you be willing to come in and advise us? And I said, how about 2 days a week? And they said, that's great. And we agreed on a rate. And pretty soon I was making more money working 2 days a week than I was full time before. And then Raytheon called me and said, hey, I heard you left. We've got all these problems down in Wichita. Could you go down and take a look? And so I ended up working 7 days a week to help prepare a board document for Raytheon, December 1st through 21st in 2001. And they called me back on the 22nd and said, the board presentation went great. When can you implement? And I just said, I'll get back to you. So I called this gentleman, Tom McLeod, who I had worked for at AT Kearney and then had worked for and with at FreeMarkets. And he had left FreeMarkets as well, a little bit before me. And I just said, hey, I think I have a consulting firm, and I know I don't want to do this by myself, so what do you say? And in February of 2002, we signed the corporate documents to start Tenzing.
What was that? What was that like? Was it just the two of you kind of traveling to sites, or did you staff up, or how did you approach growing this consulting entity?
So it literally was we call it our garage band. We literally started in my garage in Pittsburgh at the time, and we set up a little office there. When we set it up, we thought about what we might be able to do different than traditional management consulting firms, and where we thought we could do something that would bring a little more value, or value just in a different way. And we thought there was two things that maybe the traditional consulting model could be improved with. One was that when a new client comes to a consulting firm, they get whoever's available, not necessarily the best person for the job, somebody that has specific industry expertise or functional expertise. And, consulting firms hire very bright people. They're going to get super smart people for sure, and they're going to come up to speed fast. But we thought, maybe there's something to, having someone with specific functional and industry expertise. And the second thing was that we wanted someone that could come in and really empathize with the client. Someone that had sat in the chair, they've actually had, their job or something very similar. So we liked this combination of consulting and industry expertise. And so we decided day one that we're going to have no employees. And as soon as we hire an employee, we felt like, we're going to be an asset optimization engine. We're going to be focused on how do we keep that person busy as opposed to really trying to find the right person for the job. And so we started 15 years ago with this idea of no employees, experts only. And we were going to staff a team, it could be one person, it could be 10 people, depending on what the client's needs. And that was risky. We weren't sure if it was going to work, but people trusted us, and they trusted that we were only going to find, the best and brightest. And so that's what we did. And here we are, 15 years later. We have over 850 experts around the world. We work with some of the top private equity firms in the world, and some of the top consulting firms in the world actually come to us for our expertise. And we have formal agreements with two of the top 3 strategy firms in the world. So, it's really been a model that it's fairly acceptable today. I mean, if you think about kind of the gig economy and the Uber business model and other business models out there that are kind of this shared economy concept, we effectively have been doing that for 15 years now, and it's worked incredibly well.
And how does this work? Are these experts, are they employed elsewhere and they're like moonlighting and doing this? Or is this a lot of like independent type contractors that will come in for periods of time? Or what do these experts look like?
Yeah, they're all independent consultants. This is what they do full time. Now, full time for them may be, some are partially retired and they like to do a project a year. Other people have designed their lifestyle to where they can make enough in 6 months that they can cover themselves for the entire year, and they work 6 months a year, and that's it. We've got one gentleman that actually just moved back to Italy, but he used to take every summer off and go to Italy, and he'd work the rest of the year and then take the summer off. So these individuals typically have their own relationships with former clients, but also work with networks like ours, and that's kind of their deal flow. These are all hand-picked individuals, by Tom and myself. So, we like people that like to get their hands dirty. Actually, the story behind the name Tenzing comes from the way that Tom and I originally thought about how we wanted to work. We both like to get our hands dirty. We both like to jump in and actually do the work. And in a traditional consulting firm, once you get to partner level, you're just not doing that anymore. So we thought about, so we've got very senior experienced people that are helping our clients kind of achieve their goals and objectives, but doing it in kind of an egoless way and letting our clients take the credit. And we just thought that sounded a lot like a Sherpa, that helps people get to the top of the mountain, and the most famous Sherpa being Tenzing Norgay, who helped Sir Edmund Hillary get to the top of Everest for the first time. And so we actually reached out to Tenzing's family, and his son, turns out, Norbu, lives in San Francisco. And so we told him why we'd like to use his father's name and asked permission to do so, and he just said, you know what, I think my dad would be really honored, and absolutely, you can use the name. So, it goes all the way back to the DNA of the founding of Tenzing on the type of people that we like to hire and the type of people that we like to work with, and that's really why our clients continue to ask us to come back and help. It's a very different model.
You must have this amazing mental Rolodex of when you're talking to a client. I just imagine as they're describing a problem, you're just flipping through in your mind all of these different people and who would be the right tool for their specific need. Is that pretty accurate? Is that kind of your primary role now, is finding the optimum solution, the optimum person to help out a client on their unique need?
Yeah, it's funny. I just was on a call just before this with a client that we worked at before. He reached out, had a very, very specific, narrow need. We have a woman that runs our expert network now, and she manages it for us. We do have a CRM system that we use now, thank God, because I can't remember 850 people, at least not at the detail that we need. And as they gain more experience, as well, we keep up, our notes on the different things that they've learned. But, typically that is something that Tom and I will do, and we'll get together with some of our other consultants that we might have on a project, and we'll kind of spitball. All right, so this is what they need. Who do we know that has this? We'll come up with a handful of people off the top of our head, but then we'll actually go do the work of getting to the CRM and looking at who else might be out there. So we will source the best people, for the job, and it's really fun. It's really, really interesting.
One thing I want to ask about is networking. I mean, it sounds like throughout your story, networking has played a big role in your finding opportunities, and it sounds like that's something that has built Tenzing up, is the ability to network and add to this expert grid of people. And I know, in talking to a lot of veterans, a lot of them have difficulty with it. They perceive it as something that's slimy or something that is just off-putting for them. How would you explain networking to someone on active duty, and any advice on how they would approach it in a way that will be both authentic for them but also be effective?
It's a great question, because I was certainly really intimidated by it when I was leaving, because the terminology was different. The vocabulary, I was afraid of asking stupid questions. But in the end, I kind of got over it and just realized that I was going to have to do that to learn. And I think that's, my big message to them is, it's okay. People don't expect you to have all the answers and to know everything. I mean, you're coming out of one career. They certainly don't understand your vocabulary. And so, what I did was I networked into different groups that were working in industries I thought might be interesting. And I just invited someone to lunch or breakfast, or over a coffee, and just sat down and talked to them and asked them, a bunch of questions. And I just prefaced it, very simply that, hey, I'm getting ready to transition out of the military. I'm not really sure what I want to do yet, but I'd like to learn more about, your industry and maybe your career. Would you be willing to get together and just talk about that? And I mean, no one turned me down. Everybody said, sure, absolutely. And I just learned a lot about, what people did and kind of, their career path and what they liked and didn't like. And I think, that's okay. It's okay to go in there and ask, a lot of questions and just try to learn as much as you can about an industry, a job, whatever it might be.
That's great. That's great. And I know we've only got a little bit of time left here, but I'm curious, what would you want listeners to know from that time? You took a step back from Tenzing, and you were involved in various startups. What would you want people to know about that experience, or what you learned from that?
It's back to your network comment. It's 2 years after starting Tenzing, I got a call from an executive that had taken a new board position at a company, and he asked me to come in and take a look at the board documents, because it was a tech company. It was a joint venture between Boeing, Lockheed, Raytheon, Rolls-Royce, and BAE Systems. They had put $100 million into this business, and this guy he didn't know anything about the business. He didn't know, anything about the area that they worked. And he says, he called me and just said, look, Bill, I know you know this space incredibly well, and you've done stuff with tech companies. Would you come in and just take a look and kind of give me your assessment on the things I need to think about as a new board member? And so I did that. And a year later, he called me and said, hey, we're firing the CEO tomorrow. I'd like to put you forth as a candidate. What do you say? And I was kind of taken aback. I had literally just moved into my house in Sonoma 5 days before, and this company's in D.C. And I just said, well, I'm not going to pick up and move. My family's used to me traveling. If the board's okay with that, go ahead and put me in. And so, obviously I ended up getting the offer to be the CEO there, and we did a turnaround of that company, which was just really a lot of fun. It was really, really interesting. And so we grew 60% that first year, made money for the first time ever, and then we continued to grow over the next couple years. And, I think that time was really interesting to me. I gained a lot of experience. But, I also gained some experience working with boards and realizing that that's a real challenging dynamic. And in this case, my board completely changed over 3 years. The board that brought me in had one strategy and one thing that they wanted me to achieve, which was turn around the company and then, move on. They wanted to sell it. The new board that came in, they said, well, wait a minute, this is now critical infrastructure. We probably don't want to sell this. And so after 3 years, we basically agreed to disagree, and I moved on and started another business. I had been looking into renewable energy and put together just an incredible team of people that were passionate about that space, and we raised some money, raised about $3 million, and built that company up. Had to shut that down in 2009 when the downturn hit, unfortunately. And then I got a call from another former colleague who had an idea and basically said, look, I've got a guy running the business, but I need someone that can really lead sales for me and help me build this business. And it was a tech business that created markets around working capital. So it basically took invoices due to suppliers and presented them through the software to the supplier to where they could get paid early, guaranteed in 48 hours if they offered a discount. And we basically settled that in an auction setting once a week. And that business now just raised $50 million, I think, a year ago. It's got about an $800 million valuation right now. So that one's going great. But I was ready at the end of that to get back to consulting. I'd been missing it, and I was ready to step back in the ring. And so January 1st of 2012, I returned to Tenzing. It's been a wild ride there ever since. We've just had our best year ever this year. We've been growing like crazy the last few years. We just made it on the Inc. 5000 again for the second time. So it's been a lot of fun.
It's pretty. You've got just such a unique story in terms of just the diversity of things that you've done, and just kind of hopping from one thing to the next, and just kind of always being active in the air or on land, depending on where you're caught. And I know we're almost out of time, but I always want to reserve the last question to be open-ended, and that's just, what have we not talked about that you would want to share with a veteran or someone on active duty who's listening to this?
I think we've really, really hit it. To me, the biggest thing I could stress is building a network. It's just shocking to me how many opportunities have come to me through friends and colleagues, or people that have just, heard about me through someone that they knew and have reached out and asked for advice. And, I think something that I try to do quite a bit of is just helping people in their careers. I think it's great to just be able to talk to somebody, whether they're active duty and transitioning, or if they're, my daughter's finishing college, if it's one of her friends, just thinking about something, just to try to help talk to people about, different things they can do. And it always comes back to you. It's like, we talk about, with Tenzing, we talk about the karma of, you help somebody out over here, and then something comes back, somewhere else, where a client calls and just said, hey, so-and-so told me that I should call you. And so I think, it can be off-putting, it could be awkward, maybe initially, but it doesn't have to be. And, the idea of building a network, certainly LinkedIn today makes it a lot easier. You can certainly visualize your network a lot more than you used to be able to, but it's incredibly important. And also just from a career standpoint, we've talked about. I've been all over the place, and that's okay. There isn't one straight path to a career, and there certainly isn't a definition for a career. I think a long time ago it was, you went to one company and you worked there for 20 years. I think today it is what you want it to be. And with technology and the flexibility that's in the market, you can do a lot of different things, and that will define, you as a person and you as your career in ways that you just couldn't do even 10 years ago. So I think that's super exciting.
Well, this is great, Bill. I appreciate your sharing your story with us and for all the advice.
Oh, my pleasure. It's been a lot of fun, and I think anybody that's out there that's getting ready for this transition, it's so much fun. It's going to be stressful, but it's so much fun.
Surface.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Bill today. I hope you enjoyed the variety he has in his career and just the enthusiasm he brings to it. He does not seem to be a man who likes to be idle, and it's pretty fun to hear about his gallivanting around the world on different exploits. If you have liked this show, please share it with others. Please leave us a good review on iTunes. Definitely helps spread the word about what I'm doing with Beyond the Uniform. If you have ideas for other shows or recommendations on things that would better serve the veteran community, feel free to drop me a note at justin@beyondtheuniform.io or leave a comment in the show notes. Have a great week, and I will be back next week with more stories with military veterans about their civilian career.